It started with a phone call Caleb almost didn't answer. His 4-year-old daughter, Lily, was screaming in the background, giggling as she chased their scruffy mutt with a paper crown on her head. The apartment smelled like burnt waffles, again, and Caleb was elbow deep in a broken toaster. Life was chaos, but familiar chaos. Predictable. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown caller. He almost hit decline. Almost. Instead, he wiped his hand on a dish towel, slid his finger across the screen, and muttered, "Hello?" What came next didn't feel real. "Mr. Brooks? This is Elise Marlowe with Marlowe and Denton Legal. I'm calling regarding the estate of Mr. Elroy Weatherby. You've been named sole beneficiary of the property at 172 Orchard Lane." He blinked. "Sorry, who?" "Elroy Weatherby, your great-uncle on your father's side." I didn't even know I had a great-uncle." "You do now? And you just inherited a 7-bedroom Victorian mansion." Caleb stared at the cracked wall of his kitchen. A mansion? This had to be a scam. But it wasn't. 2 weeks later, Caleb stood in front of a wrought iron gate dusted with ivy, holding Lily in one arm and a folder of legal documents in the other. The key in his pocket felt unreal, like a movie prop. The mansion beyond the gate loomed like something out of a storybook. 3 stories, gables and turrets, painted lady trim and peeling pastels. Faded elegance like a once great queen now dressed in moth-eaten silk. "Daddy," Lily whispered, tugging on his hoodie, "is that a castle?" He looked down at her. Her eyes were wide, bright with awe, and maybe a little fear. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, baby, I think it is." Inside, it smelled like time. Dust, varnish, the faint perfume of old paper, and something else, something sweet and strange, like linseed oil left out in the sun. The air was heavy, quiet in that way old houses get, where every creak feels like someone clearing their throat in another room. Lily dashed ahead down the grand hallway, her sneakers echoing on the wood floor. "It's so big," she shouted. "Can we live here, Daddy? Can we stay forever?" Caleb smiled but didn't answer. The house felt asleep, not abandoned exactly, just waiting. In the kitchen, he found a dusty envelope with his name in looping cursive. Inside was a note. "To Caleb Brooks. I never met you, but I believe you'll do right by her. The house is yours now. Just don't go in the attic until you're ready to see. E.W." He read it twice, then a third time. "Don't go in the attic." He looked up. Through the ceiling, somewhere above, was that room, quiet, locked, watching. They spent their first night in the master bedroom on sleeping bags. The heat barely worked. Pipes groaned like they hadn't carried water in decades. Caleb had brought Lily's favorite glow-in-the-dark stars, and together they stuck them to the high ceiling like they'd done in every apartment before this one. Later, after she fell asleep, he wandered the halls with a flashlight. Everything was preserved. The furniture, though covered in sheets, looked antique and expensive. Portraits lined the walls, some with the eyes scratched out. Bookshelves sagged with volumes thick as bricks. There were journals, too, letters, boxes of postcards bundled with ribbon. A whole life lived here, maybe several. But the attic door remained locked. The next morning, a neighbor stopped by, an older woman with kind eyes and a voice like gravel. "You're Elroy's boy?" "Great nephew," Caleb corrected, "I guess." She nodded toward the house. "You staying?" "I think so." A pause, then, "Well, just don't let the little one go upstairs alone. That attic's not right." Caleb frowned. "Why? Mold? Animals?" She just shook her head. Memories. That night, Lily woke up crying. Caleb rushed in, heart pounding. "What's wrong?" "I heard a tapping," she whispered. "From the ceiling." He glanced up. The attic. He didn't sleep much after that. Over the next few days, Caleb started cleaning room by room. He didn't have the money to hire help. Being a single dad meant stretching every dollar. But something about the work was peaceful, meditative. He found himself drawn to the sunroom on the second floor, where light spilled through tall windows in warm golden rays. Lily would sit there for hours with her crayons, coloring quietly, sometimes humming tunes he didn't recognize. She started drawing strange things, abstract shapes, swirling colors, faces that didn't look like cartoons but like portraits, like someone had lived inside her crayon box and whispered what to draw. When he asked who they were, she just said, "They were in my dreams." Caleb tried to laugh it off, but it stuck with him. Quick note, friends, if you're hooked by now, you're exactly the kind of person we created this channel for. Hit that subscribe button to join Hero Dad Stories community, where we explore the unexpected, the emotional and the powerful stories that bond humans and homes, and sometimes the secrets they hide. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Back to the story. One morning while scrubbing the baseboards in the hallway outside Lily's room, Caleb noticed something strange. A soft, hollow sound when he knocked on the wall. He tapped again. Definitely hollow. He fetched a screwdriver, pried off a loose panel, and there, nestled inside a cutout space, was a small, oil-stained bundle of cloth. Inside the cloth, an antique key. Heavy, ornate, brass with a curled end like a question mark. No label, no tag, just a whisper of purpose. Caleb didn't need to ask what had opened. That night, as a storm rolled in and the wind howled through the trees, he stood before the attic door with the key in hand. His fingers hovered at the lock. Lily was asleep, the house was dark, and everything inside him screamed, "Don't." But curiosity, it's a strange beast, especially when you're a father who needs answers about your past, your daughter's future, and the strange silence above your head. The key clicked. The door creaked. The smell hit him first. Turpentine and time, paint and dust, and something deeper, harder to name. He took one step in, then another, and froze. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. The room before him was not an attic. It was a cathedral, a forgotten studio, lit by a single stained glass window, casting rainbows across the floor. Canvases leaned against every wall. Brushes sat in jars like soldiers awaiting orders. Palettes still held dried smears of color. Red, cobalt blue, ochre. Time had settled like snow, but nothing had been disturbed. It was as if the artist had stepped out for coffee and never returned. Caleb's eyes caught on a signature, small in the corner of a massive canvas, E. Marrow. The name meant nothing to him. Not yet, but it would. And soon the whole world would know what had been sleeping in that attic for 40 years. The first thing Caleb noticed, once his heart stopped pounding, was the stillness. The attic wasn't just a storage space or some forgotten crawl space filled with boxes. It was a world unto itself, a creative sanctum untouched by time. Dust coated everything, but there was no chaos, no cobwebs, no clutter, just order, intent, silence. He stepped forward slowly, his boots creaking against the old floorboards. The air was thick with age, but beneath the mustiness, he caught that same familiar scent he couldn't place before. Linseed oil, maybe. It reminded him of a school art room, a memory from another life. To his left stood a long workbench, its surface covered in dry paint splatters and old glass jars. Some still held brushes, the bristles stiff and curled from time. Others were packed with bits of charcoal, crumpled paper, palettes stained with color. It was as if the artist had stepped away in the middle of a session and never came back. He turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. There were canvases, dozens of them. Some leaned against the walls, unfinished or reversed. Others hung in tight rows, propped carefully on easels or racks. They varied in size, but many were massive, 6 feet tall or more, with bold strokes, sharp contrast, and unmistakable skill. But what chilled Caleb wasn't the talent. It was the emotion. These paintings were alive. They stared back at him, some mournful, others chaotic, some so beautiful it hurt to look at them too long. One depicted a child reaching into a dark forest. Another showed a man sitting alone on a rooftop beneath a bleeding sky. The faces, my God, the faces, they looked haunted, or maybe just honest in a way the world doesn't usually allow. He moved toward a large canvas near the center of the room. It was turned backward, the back of the wooden frame facing out like it had been hidden deliberately. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. He flipped it around and gasped. It was a self-portrait, or at least he thought it was. The subject was a man, middle-aged, thin, with deep-set eyes and hair wild from neglect. The mouth was smeared as though the artist had changed his mind or lost control of the brush. The eyes, though, they were sharp, painfully vivid. They bore into Caleb with a knowing glare, like they'd been waiting for him. Scrawled in the corner, E. Marrow. Caleb backed away. That name again. He'd seen it once before in the old journals downstairs. And again, last night in the attic. He didn't know who Elias Marrow was. But whoever he'd been, this attic belonged to him. This house had breathed his thoughts, absorbed his grief, held on to his genius like a secret too dangerous to tell. Caleb sat down on an old wooden stool. His knees felt weak. He had questions, 1,000 of them. Who was Elias Marrow? Why was he never mentioned in the inheritance paperwork? Why was all of this art, this time capsule, left hidden, wrapped in silence? He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 1 a.m. He stood, brushed the dust from his jeans, and walked toward the narrow attic stairs. As he passed the last canvas, he noticed something tucked behind it, a stack of spiral notebooks bound in cracked leather. Journals. He grabbed the top one. On the first page, written in uneven block letters, "For whoever finds this." I tried to burn them all. I couldn't. They were too loud, I'm sorry. Caleb clutched the notebook to his chest and shut off the light. The next morning, the sun spilled through the kitchen window as Lily spooned Cheerios into her mouth, humming to herself. Caleb sat across from her, bleary-eyed, nursing his second cup of coffee. The journal lay open on the counter beside him, turned to the second page. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd spent the better part of the night flipping through its pages, trying to make sense of Marrow's handwriting. It was messy, scattered, a mix of sketches, half-poems, and fragmented memories. But one thing was clear. Elias Marrow had been consumed by his art. It wasn't just his passion, it was his prison. Caleb skimmed a passage again. "The color blue keeps whispering to me. I try to sleep and it wakes me. I try to paint anything else, but the blue keeps screaming. I see her in the hallway. She was never real, but I painted her anyway." Some pages were smudged, the ink run with water damage. Others were written so violently the pen had torn through. Mental illness, grief, obsession. It was all there, tangled together like a vine choking the artist's mind. He flipped further. A sketch of a small child's hand, then a painting plan, layers, color palettes, names. One of the names looked familiar. Lillian. He looked up at his daughter, still humming, still innocent. Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe not. Later that afternoon, he brought one of the smaller canvases down from the attic. He dusted it gently, then tucked it into the back seat of his truck beneath an old blanket. There was a gallery downtown, nothing fancy, just a locally owned art space run by an older couple who'd lived in town forever. Caleb figured if anyone had heard of E. Marrow, they would. The gallery owner was a silver-haired woman named Marnie. She greeted him with a skeptical smile, the kind you give someone who looks like they found something at a flea market and think it's worth millions. Caleb pulled the canvas from the blanket and set it down gently on a side table. Marnie's expression changed immediately. Her mouth dropped slightly. She leaned in close, studying the brushwork, then stepped back, stunned. "My God," she whispered. "Where did you find this?" Caleb hesitated. "In my attic." This is Elias Marrow's work." "So I've gathered." "No, I mean this is the Elias Marrow. His paintings are practically folklore around here. He disappeared in 1979. Some people said he went mad, others said he died in the woods. There were rumors he set fire to his own studio and vanished." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. She looked at him carefully. "You're saying you found this in your attic?" "I've got about 20 more like it, in journals." Her hand went to her mouth. "You're sitting on a fortune. Do you have any idea what these are worth?" He didn't. Not really. Marnie stepped closer. "Marrow's last verified painting sold at auction in New York 6 years ago. It went for over $10 million. $10 million. The number landed in Caleb's chest like a punch. That night, he didn't tell Lily about the gallery, or the money, or Elias Marrow. She was in the living room drawing as always, her crayons scattered on the rug, her paper filled with lines and color. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. She was sketching a house, not this house, but similar. And in the attic window, a tiny figure stood watching. "Who's that?" Caleb asked gently, pointing to the shadow in the window. Lily looked up at him. "That's the man who used to live here," she said. "He misses his pictures." Caleb's skin prickled. "He told me in a dream," she added simply. Then she went back to coloring. Upstairs in the attic, the canvases waited. And beneath one of the floorboards, something else did too. Something Caleb wouldn't find until much later. A painting unlike the rest, wrapped in linen, hidden for a reason. But not tonight. Tonight, he sat beside his daughter, watching her draw, wondering what Elias Marrow had really seen, and why, somehow, after all this time, the house had waited for them. Caleb couldn't stop thinking about that conversation with Marnie. $10 million. He wasn't the kind of man who chased money. His priorities were small and quiet. Lily's next checkup, keeping the lights on, finding shoes that didn't fall apart after 2 months. But 10 million? That wasn't just a number. That was freedom. That was college. That was never having to say "not this month, sweetheart" again. And yet, he hadn't gone back to the gallery. Something inside him told him not to. Not yet. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. Lily continued drawing, always in the sunroom, always in silence. Her pictures grew more detailed. She stopped using her pinks and purples. Now it was deep reds, charcoal grays, mustard yellow. She began blending colors in ways Caleb hadn't seen her do before. He asked her where she learned it. She shrugged. The pictures in the attic showed me. That sentence sat like a stone in his chest. One evening, while fixing a sagging floorboard near the staircase, Caleb noticed a strange discoloration in the plastered wall. He tapped it out of habit. Hollow, he frowned. Most of the house was solid oak and brick. Nothing sounded hollow unless it was built that way. He grabbed a flathead screwdriver and chipped away gently. Beneath the surface, he found something wrapped in oilcloth, tucked neatly inside a narrow cavity in the wall. He unwrapped it. Inside was an envelope, a photograph, and a key. The photo was black and white, grainy, faded. It showed a man in a painter's smock standing beside a younger woman with long dark hair. They weren't smiling, but they were close. Their hands touched lightly, like they didn't even realize it. On the back of the photo, in scrawled ink, Elias plus Mina, October 1977. The name hit him like a whisper. Mina. He had seen it before, in the margins of the journals. Always written carefully with a sense of reverence, sometimes underlined, sometimes followed by chaotic sketches. The envelope contained only a note. I never should have let her go. The house remembers everything. If you're reading this, follow the blue. Caleb looked at the key again. It was small, almost delicate, different from the heavy attic key. This one looked like it belonged to a drawer, or maybe a jewelry box. He turned it over in his palm. On the underside, etched into the brass, N9. That night, after Lily went to sleep, Caleb returned to the attic. The silence greeted him like an old friend. He moved carefully among the easels, checking drawers, old trunks, wooden cabinets. He didn't know what N9 referred to. The attic furniture wasn't labeled, but near the back of the room, partially hidden by stacked canvases, he found a narrow cabinet with painted numbers on the drawers. There it was, N9. The drawer was stuck. He jiggled the handle, then gently eased it open. Inside was a single roll of canvas, tied with red thread, in a small leather-bound notebook. He unrolled the canvas on the work table. The painting was unfinished, but already stunning. A woman stood in a field of golden light. Her face wasn't complete, but her eyes, her eyes had already been painted in full. They were electric, alive. It was her, the woman from the photograph, Mina. He flipped open the notebook. Page after page was filled with sketches of her face, notes about her voice, her scent, the way her hair curled at her collarbone. But after about 20 pages, the tone changed. The lines became frantic. Words crossed out. Whole passages blacked with ink. She left. I told her not to, but she said the house was too much, that it pressed on her chest, that it wanted things. I keep painting her, but it isn't enough. She's fading. I hear her footsteps at night. I see Lily in my dreams now, but she's not born yet. Not really. Not here. Caleb stared at that last line for a long time. Lily? It couldn't mean his daughter. It was a common name. Coincidence. But the hairs on the back of his neck stood anyway. The next morning, Lily asked if they could go outside and pick leaves for crafts. The air was crisp, the trees flaring in autumn gold and red. They walked the property together. Caleb let her gather as many leaves as she wanted. She danced in circles with a handful of maple branches, spinning in her red jacket like a tiny whirlwind. Then she stopped suddenly and turned toward the overgrown edge of the property. Daddy, she said softly, there's someone out there. Caleb froze. Where? She pointed toward a gap in the trees. She's watching. He looked. No one was there, only a sloping ridge and thick woods. You probably saw a deer, he said gently. Lily shook her head. She's wearing a blue dress. That night, unable to shake the unease, Caleb brought down 3 more paintings from the attic. Small ones this time. He didn't plan to sell them. He just needed to look at them under better light. He set them up in the kitchen under a lamp. The third one stopped him cold. It was a small portrait of a child, maybe 4 years old, dark hair, round cheeks, sitting in the sunroom, surrounded by crayons. She looked exactly like Lily. He pulled one of Lily's drawings from the fridge and held them side by side. The posture, the hands, even the shape of her tiny sneakers. Identical. He checked the corner of the canvas. The signature was different this time. Not Elias Marrow, just a single letter, M. The next day, he returned to the gallery. Marnie greeted him with a wary look. Been expecting you. He brought in the new paintings, including the one of the child. When she saw it, her eyes widened. This is new, she whispered. What do you mean? She pulled out a catalog from under the counter, a thick book of known Elias Marrow works. She flipped quickly, stopping at a page that showed a different version of the same painting. Same composition, but the child's face was unfinished. It was labeled Untitled, Sketch for Blue, Series Number 9. This one was never recovered. Everyone assumed it had been destroyed. Caleb nodded slowly. It wasn't. Marnie leaned closer. You need to be careful. Once word gets out that you found Marrow's lost studio, you're going to get attention. Serious attention. Not all of it good. He didn't answer. She tilted her head. Do you know what happened to him? Only what the journals say. Then you know how it ended? Caleb frowned. He disappeared. Marnie's voice dropped. He didn't just disappear. He locked himself in the studio and never came out. By the time the neighbors forced the door open, the paintings were gone. Every single one. The room was empty. Caleb's stomach tightened. But I've seen the studio. It's full. Marnie blinked. What? He looked her in the eye. It's not empty anymore. That night, back at the house, Caleb found Lily asleep on the floor of the sunroom, curled up with her crayons beside her. She'd drawn something new. It was a field, a woman in a long blue dress, and a man standing beside her with a paintbrush in his hand. And in the sky above them, a tiny child with wings floated, watching. On the bottom, in crooked preschool handwriting, she had written one word, home. Caleb didn't remember falling asleep, but when he woke the next morning, the sunlight had already spilled halfway across the floor of the sunroom, warming the space like a memory. Lily was still curled up on the rug, her arms around her drawing pad, soft breaths puffing through her lips. She looked peaceful, untouched by the heaviness in the air. The night before still hung over Caleb like a fog, the painting, the journal entries, the key in the wall, Elias's spiral into obsession. Mina's name etched into everything like a ghost. And now Lily's uncanny connection, her sketches, her dreams, the way she always knew more than she should have. He moved gently, not wanting to wake her, and went to the kitchen. The pot of coffee from yesterday sat cold on the burner. He dumped it and made a fresh batch, the familiar hiss and gurgle offering some small comfort. He poured himself a mug and leaned against the counter. The gallery, the paintings, the talk of millions. He should feel excited, grateful even, but instead all he felt was unease. There was something under all of this that hadn't been said, something in the gaps. And it wasn't just Elias Marrow's ghost or artistic torment. It was deeper than that and older. Later that morning, while Lily played in the front yard with a hula hoop she found in the garage, Caleb wandered through the house with Elias's journal in hand. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. More clues, maybe, more answers, or just proof that he wasn't imagining everything. He found himself in the upstairs library, a room he'd only half cleaned. Shelves lined the walls, all crammed with hardback books in every shade of wear. A faint smell of aged paper and wood polish lingered in the air. It reminded him of college libraries, of hours he used to spend pretending to study while really flipping through old poetry books. He noticed a thick, leather-bound book lying on the floor by the fireplace. It didn't belong to the shelf. The spine had been hand-stitched, no title. He opened it. It wasn't a book. It was a ledger. Inside were long, careful entries, dated, numbered, with descriptions. Each line listed something like 328, the girl in blue, unfinished, destroyed. 341, Mina in wind, stored, locked attic. 346, self-study number 5, unfit, burned. Dozens of paintings, most of them destroyed, some marked hidden. At the very end of the ledger, a final line had been added, but not by the same hand. The ink was darker, the letters sharper, cleaner. 377, final offering, hidden, keep sealed. No location, no description. Just that, final offering. Caleb felt his stomach twist. The last painting, still somewhere in the house. That evening, Lily came inside just before sunset, her cheeks pink from the cool air. She walked straight up to Caleb, holding out a folded slip of paper. I found this on the porch, she said. He frowned and opened it. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, written in slanted cursive, barely legible. You're not the only one looking. The studio was never meant to be found. Be careful who you talk to. There was no signature. Caleb looked out through the screen door. No one. Just the long gravel driveway, the wind rustling the trees. He stepped outside, heart racing. Hello? No answer. He checked the mailbox, the hedges, walked down the path toward the road. Nothing. But someone had been here. And they knew. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the creaks and groans of the old house, thinking about every decision that led him here, every twist of fate, every coincidence that suddenly didn't feel like coincidence at all. At 2:13 a.m., he gave up. He climbed the attic stairs. The smell of oil and dust welcomed him like an old friend. He turned on the bare bulb overhead and walked slowly among the canvases, stopping every so often to study them again. The unfinished woman, the faceless child, the stormy sea, the man with the smeared mouth. He stood in front of the self-portrait again, the one Elias had painted just before he vanished. But this time he noticed something different. A shape carved faintly into the wood of the frame, not painted, etched. It was a small circle with a line through it, almost like a compass symbol. And next to it, tiny lettering, under hearth. Caleb narrowed his eyes. The hearth? He found it 20 minutes later in the downstairs sitting room, a fireplace he hadn't used yet, half covered by an old trunk. He pulled the trunk aside, knelt down, and ran his hands along the brickwork. The third brick from the left was loose. He pulled it. Behind it was a cavity, just big enough to hold a wrapped parcel, maybe the size of a shoebox. It was sealed in linen and bound in red twine, like a relic. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a flat canvas, rolled. He unrolled it gently on the living room floor. What he saw took his breath away. It was Lily, or someone who looked like her. Not exactly. The child in the painting had longer hair, paler skin, but the resemblance was impossible to ignore. She stood in the center of a dark room, lit only by moonlight. Around her were broken windows, shattered easels, shadows that looked like twisted figures reaching. But the child glowed, not with sunlight, not with color, with presence. In the corner, painted almost as an afterthought, was a woman, her face in her hands, knees drawn to her chest, surrounded by the broken shapes. And next to her, Elias Marrow. Paintbrush in hand, eyes hollow, Caleb sat back on his heels. This was the final offering. This was what Marrow had hidden. Not a masterpiece, a warning, or a confession. The next morning, Marnie called. Caleb, she said, voice tight. Someone came by the gallery asking questions about you. He stiffened. What kind of questions? Wanted to know where you live, said he was a private collector, but something felt off. Name? He didn't give one. Did he say who sent him? No, but he asked if you had found the sealed one. That's what he called it. Then he left. Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. Thanks, Marnie. He hung up and stared out the window. Someone knew, and they were coming. That afternoon, Caleb picked Lily up and held her tight. She didn't ask why. She just hugged him back. He knew now that they weren't just caretakers of a haunted studio. They were holding onto a story too dangerous to tell, one that had pulled Elias Marrow into madness, that had made Mina vanish, that had somehow reached across decades to touch his daughter. He walked through the house, checking locks, doors, windows. That night, he placed the final offering painting back behind the brick and sealed it shut. Some things weren't meant for the world to see, and some ghosts didn't want to be known. 3 days passed, and Caleb kept expecting something, someone to show up. The man who visited Marnie's gallery never came to the house, but the feeling of being watched settled in like fog across the property. Caleb found himself checking the locks twice each night, sometimes 3 times. He kept a flashlight and a hammer by the bed. Not exactly a gun, but it was what he had. He even debated sleeping in the attic with the paintings, just to keep them close. But that felt wrong too, like playing a game he didn't understand, with pieces someone else had already set in place. Lily seemed fine, blissfully unaware of the shift. She continued drawing, asking questions about clouds and shadows and whether squirrels dream. But even in her calmness, Caleb saw hints, pauses when she walked past the attic staircase, glances toward the back of the house when the wind picked up. Something had changed. She felt it too. On the fourth morning, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway. They hadn't been there the night before. The tread was wide, off-road tires, maybe a pickup. Someone had pulled in and backed out without knocking. Watching, Caleb checked the front porch for another note. Nothing. But under the old bench beside the door, he found a cigarette butt, still faintly warm, unsmoked down to the filter. He didn't smoke. No one had visited. He stared at it for a long time, then flicked it into the trash and locked the door. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. Again. He wandered the house barefoot in sweatpants and a flannel shirt, listening to the floor creak under his own weight, the way it always did when it was just him and the silence. The wind was picking up outside, dry leaves scraping along the windows. He walked past the attic door, stopped, then turned the handle and went in. The studio looked exactly as he left it. Painting, notebooks, sketches, everything still. Watching. He took out Elias's last journal, the one that mentioned Mina, the one that hinted at a sealed painting long before he found it. One passage had stuck with him. She warned me not to finish it, that it wasn't mine to make, that the house had shown it to me, not given it, but I couldn't stop. She said some things were buried for a reason. Caleb read the line 3 times. He glanced at the far wall where he'd once considered hanging the final offering, then thought better of it. Maybe Mina had been right. Maybe Elias crossed the line with that painting. Maybe it was never supposed to exist. And maybe it still wanted to be found. At breakfast, Lily pushed her cereal around with her spoon. "You okay, Bug?" Caleb asked. She nodded. But then she said, "The man with the heavy shoes was on the porch again." He froze. "What do you mean?" "He stepped like this." She mimicked a slow, deliberate stomp with her feet. Boom, 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 like his shoes were mad. Caleb tried to stay calm. "Did you see him?" She shook her head. "I was pretending to sleep." He didn't knock, just stood there. He couldn't breathe for a second. "Okay," he said finally. "Thanks for telling me, baby." He made her pancakes, extra chocolate chips, let her watch cartoons. Then he checked every inch of the porch. No footprints, no notes. But the wind chimes, quiet for days, were tangled into a knot like someone had twisted them by hand. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. An unknown number. He answered, expecting silence. Instead, a voice, calm, male, mid-50s maybe, polite. "Mr. Brooks?" "Speaking." "My name is Alton Blake. I represent a private collector out of New York. We believe you may be in possession of certain works by Elias Marrow." Caleb said nothing. The voice continued, "We have no interest in causing trouble, but we are prepared to make a generous offer. Discreet, of course. Cash, no press." Caleb cleared his throat. "How did you get this number?" "We have contacts. Miss Keller at the gallery mentioned you'd come by with something significant. She didn't say much. She didn't have to." Caleb's grip tightened. "I'm not selling." There was a long pause. Then, "Not even for 7 figures? I'm not interested." "Mr. Brooks," the man said evenly, "you have something of great value, and things of great value tend to attract the wrong kind of attention. It would be a shame if your daughter ever felt unsafe in that big old house." Caleb's body went cold. "You come near my daughter," he said, voice shaking, "and I'll bury you under the porch." A soft chuckle. "That's not necessary, Mr. Brooks. We'll be in touch." Click. He called the police, filed a report. The deputy was nice enough, young guy, probably just out of academy. Said he'd swing by a few times, keep an eye out. But his tone made it clear. They couldn't do much unless someone broke a law. A creepy phone call wasn't a crime. And besides, it wasn't like he could explain the whole truth, that there was a $1 million painting hidden behind a fireplace brick, that his attic was a museum sealed in time, that his daughter might somehow be tied to a long-dead painter's haunted masterpiece. That kind of talk got people flagged, or worse. So Caleb nodded, thanked the deputy, and went back inside. That night, he pulled a metal toolbox from the garage, dragged it into the living room, and took out his old hammer, a rusty box cutter, and a roll of duct tape. He didn't know what he was prepping for, just that he needed to be ready. At 1:17 no Hershey. Emmy heard footsteps on the porch. Not soft, heavy, boom, boom, boom. Just like Lily said. He turned off all the lights, crept to the window, and peeked through the blinds. A man stood at the foot of the steps, wearing a long coat, wide shoulders, thick-soled boots. He looked straight at the window, though Caleb was sure he couldn't see through the glass. He didn't move, didn't knock, just stood there. Then after what felt like an hour, he turned and walked back down the driveway. Got into a black SUV, drove off without headlights. Caleb didn't sleep after that. He stayed by the window with a crowbar across his lap. In the morning, Lily held out another drawing. This one was different. It showed their house, but not like a happy cartoon. It was dark, sketched with black and gray crayon. Shadows around the windows. A man with no face standing on the porch. In the attic window, 2 figures stared down at him. Caleb and Lily. watching. By noon, he'd made up his mind. He was going to the courthouse. He needed to research the Weatherby family, the deed, the property records, the story of how Elias Marrow ended up here, tucked away in this mansion with his ghosts and canvases. Someone had to know more. There was a reason Elias had painted that child, a reason he'd hidden the final offering, a reason this house had stayed untouched for 40 years until Caleb showed up. And it was time he found out what that reason was. The county courthouse sat like an aging giant in the middle of downtown. Red brick, white columns, a tired flag fluttering half-mast above the lawn. Caleb hadn't been inside a government building since he signed Lily's birth certificate. But this time he walked through the double glass doors with a new kind of urgency. He carried a small folder under his arm, Elias's journal, the ledger, and a photo of the painting he had hidden again behind the hearth. Just enough to jog memories, not enough to raise red flags. The clerk behind the records desk looked up with that same blend of polite boredom you saw in small-town offices everywhere. Her name tag read Trina. She looked maybe 50, wore a pumpkin-colored cardigan, and stirred her coffee while typing. "Can I help you?" she asked, not quite looking at him. "I hope so," Caleb said. "I just inherited a house up on Orchard Lane. Used to belong to Elroy Weatherby. I'm trying to dig into the property history, and if you have anything, family records tied to a man named Elias Marrow." At that, she paused. "Marrow, huh?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while." She typed a few things, then stood. "Give me a few minutes. Might have to pull the microfilm." 40 minutes later, Caleb sat in a quiet corner of the records room, flipping through yellowed file folders and black and white copies. Trina had been helpful, more than he expected. She'd found land deeds dating back to the 1930s, death certificates, probate court documents, and a thin file marked Weatherby Marrow 1979. It was that last one that made his hands go still. Inside was a report, typewritten, badly scanned. A wellness check performed by police on October 4th, 1979, after multiple noise complaints from neighbors and rumors of strange behavior from a Mr. Elias Marrow, known resident artist of the Weatherby estate. The notes were brief, clinical. Subject was found seated in the attic studio, surrounded by multiple canvases, unresponsive but conscious. No signs of forced entry, no indication of others present. Subject was removed under 5150 for psychiatric evaluation. House was sealed by court order pending mental health review and property status. No mention of Mina. No mention of the paintings being removed. No mention of a child. But a second sheet tucked in the back caught his eye. It was a hospital record from October 5th. Under patient intake, the name read, Elias James Marrow. Next of kin, Mina Louise Weatherby, estranged. Mental health status, psychotic episode, visual hallucinations, dissociation, verbal repetition of, she's already here. Caleb exhaled, chest tight. Mina was a Weatherby. She was related to Elroy, the man who'd left Caleb the house. But how? And why did Caleb, of all people, end up with it? He called Marnie from the parking lot. "Did you ever find out who Elias was married to?" he asked. There was a pause. "I didn't know he was," she said. "Are you sure?" Her name was Mina Weatherby. She's listed on the hospital intake as next of kin. That changes a lot. Weatherby's a big name in this town. They owned half the ridge 100 years ago. Some folks still won't walk past the orchard out there. "Do you know if they had any kids?" "None that I know of," she said. "But you might want to talk to June Kelly. She used to be Mina's neighbor, still lives 2 doors down from you." The woman who answered the door had snow-white hair and eyes like she'd seen too much. Her porch smelled like cat food and old lavender. But when Caleb mentioned Mina's name, she stepped aside and let him in without a word. "I knew her when she was a girl," June said. "Mina Weatherby, real quiet type, bit dreamy, always drawing. She and Elias got married young, barely 20. She poured them both tea in mugs that didn't match. He moved in with her at the big house, said he needed the light up there, the attic, said it was the only place his colors worked." Caleb nodded. "Do you remember what happened to her?" June's eyes dimmed. "No one really knows. One day she just left. No note, no goodbye. Some folks think she ran off to California. Others say she drowned in the quarry." "But you don't think so?" June looked at him long and hard. "No, sir. I think that house swallowed her whole." That night, Caleb stood in front of the mirror in the upstairs bathroom, shaving cream still on his jaw, and stared at himself. Lily slept 2 rooms down, surrounded by her drawings. Downstairs, the final offering remained sealed behind the fireplace. And in the attic, so many stories unfinished. He thought about Mina, About a young woman who disappeared into a house, a man who lost his mind chasing something only he could see, and a girl named Lily who drew like a prodigy and saw things she shouldn't know. It didn't make sense. But at the same time, it made all the sense in the world. The next day, Caleb took Lily into town to buy her new boots. Hers were falling apart again. She picked ones with little red foxes on the sides and stomped around the store like she was marching into battle. While she tried on sneakers, Caleb asked the store clerk if he'd ever heard the name Marrow. Like the painter? Yeah. The clerk whistled. He's got a painting on display at the State Museum. Super rare. People say the guy was a lunatic. Gave up everything for his vision. He made air quotes. Creepy stuff, honestly. Caleb looked at Lily. She was trying to tie her shoe. Her tongue stuck out the side of her mouth in total concentration. That evening, back at the house, Caleb sat on the porch while Lily colored on the steps. She held up her new picture. It was a woman in a blue dress again, always the blue dress. But this time, the woman stood beside a child, a little girl, and the two of them were walking away from the house. "What's this one called?" he asked. Lily smiled. "Going home." He paused. "Who's going home?" She pointed to the child. "That's me." "And the lady?" "That's her," Lily said. "Who's her?" Lily looked at him seriously. "Mina." Caleb froze. He hadn't said the name around her, not once. That night, as rain whispered on the roof and the attic sat heavy above them, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with every piece of paper, every journal, every sketch laid out in front of him. He drew connections, Weatherby family lines, hospital dates, ledger entries, paintings that shouldn't exist, visions passed down like DNA. He wrote one question in the center of a blank page. Was Lily born with this? And below it, another. Or is the house choosing her now? Upstairs in the attic, something shifted. A draft, a hum in the wood. A single canvas leaning against the back wall fell to the floor, face up. It wasn't signed. It wasn't finished. But the face of the child on the canvas was Lily. Again, only this time her eyes were closed. Caleb didn't know why he woke up at 3:09 a.m. There was no noise, no footsteps, no porch creaks. Lily wasn't crying. But something inside him felt pulled, like a thread in his chest had been gently tugged by invisible fingers. He got up, grabbed his hoodie, and walked barefoot through the house. The lights were off, but the moonlight bleeding through the windows was enough to see by. Everything was still. The floor didn't even groan like it normally did. When he reached the base of the attic stairs, the air felt heavier. Not cold, not hot, just dense, like the silence was made of something thicker than air. He climbed. At the top, the attic door stood open. He was sure he'd closed it. Inside, nothing had moved. The canvases stood exactly where he left them. The dried brushes, the sketches, the journals. But something felt different, an absence of stillness. And in the far corner, leaning face down against the wall, was the same blank canvas he'd noticed weeks earlier. It had been untouched. No signature, no marks. Now it wasn't blank anymore. A new painting had appeared. He didn't paint it. Lily couldn't have painted it. But it was real. The image showed the house, his house, seen from a hill, under stormy clouds. The porch lights glowed. A woman in a blue dress stood by the gate, holding the hand of a small girl. They were walking away into the trees. Behind them in the attic window stood a man, looking out, watching them go. The signature in the corner was fresh, but not Elias Marrow. It was Lily, in her crooked little letters, just like on her drawings. Lily, B. The next morning, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, holding the canvas in his lap. Lily sat across from him, chewing a piece of toast. She didn't say anything, just watched him with curious eyes. "Did you paint this?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. He turned the canvas around again, studied it under the light. It was painted in oils. Not crayon, not watercolor. Real brushwork. Clean, mature strokes. Way beyond the ability of a 4-year-old. But it was her signature. "I dreamed it," she said suddenly. Caleb blinked. "You dreamed the painting?" She nodded. "She told me how." "Who did?" Lily didn't answer. She slid out of her chair, wandered into the living room, and began stacking her crayons like building blocks. By noon, Caleb knew what he had to do. He grabbed a crowbar from the garage and removed the brick in the hearth again. The final offering was still there, still wrapped in linen, still humming with that strange energy that made his hands sweat just to touch it. He unwrapped it carefully, looked at it one last time. He didn't know if it was evil, or haunted, or cursed. But he knew it wasn't meant to stay here. That afternoon, he drove it 2 counties over to a private storage facility, rented a climate-controlled unit under a fake name, left no forwarding address. He didn't tell Marnie, didn't call the gallery, didn't even take a picture. He locked the unit, dropped the key into a storm drain, and drove away without looking back. For the next few weeks, things returned to something like normal. Lily stopped talking about dreams. She went back to drawing rainbows and squirrels and birthday cakes. No more women in blue dresses. No more haunted houses. Caleb started fixing up the house again, repainting trim, oiling old hinges, patching drywall. Every small repair made the place feel more his, less borrowed, less watched. The studio remained locked. He hung a framed picture of Lily's fox boot drawing outside the door, like a seal. Whatever story lived in that attic, it was finished. On the first snow of the season, Caleb took Lily sledding. She laughed so hard she cried. And when they came back, cold and red-cheeked, she sat in the window seat with a mug of cocoa and stared out at the blowing white. He sat beside her. "You happy here?" he asked. She nodded. "You ever think about the lady in the blue dress?" Lily paused. Thought. "She's not sad anymore," she said softly. "Why not?" She remembered who she was. Caleb put an arm around her. Outside, the snow kept falling. Months passed. They painted Lily's room purple, adopted a dog named Spaghetti. Caleb started part-time work at the local hardware store, just enough to stay busy. He never told anyone about the paintings, or the studio, or the man in the long coat. No one else came. No more tire tracks. No more calls. Whatever had been chasing Elias's ghost, maybe it gave up, or maybe it found peace. One spring morning, a letter came in the mail with no return address. Inside was a black and white photograph. It was the same photo of Elias and Mina he'd found in the wall, but this one had something added. A handwritten note across the bottom. "She was my sister. Thank you for giving her back to me." Caleb held the photo for a long time, then tucked it inside Elias's journal and placed it on a shelf. Some stories didn't need to be solved. They just needed to be heard. One night, much later, when the world felt soft and quiet, Caleb found Lily asleep on the rug in the sunroom again. Beside her was a new drawing. It was simple, crayon on folded paper. A man in a red flannel shirt, standing in a doorway, holding a paintbrush. Beside him, a little girl with a fox on her boots. Behind them, a house that smiled. He flipped it over. On the back, she'd written, "We stayed. Thank you so much for joining us on this story." Whether you believe in ghosts or not, sometimes the most powerful hauntings live in memory, art, and the legacies we leave behind, not to scare, but to connect. Now, we'd love to hear from you. If you found a hidden attic in a house you inherited, would you open the door? Or would you leave the past alone? Let us know in the comments below. We'll be reading.